clear that no enemy will ever even dream of threatening America's Navy. There's no Navy even.
At approximately 4:17 local time, 3 fast-moving Venezuelan patrol vessels surged out of the dark Caribbean horizon and sliced across the bow of the U.S. carrier strike group at roughly 28 knots. Their formation cut directly into the course of the American fleet, forming what appeared to be a menacing water barrier aimed at forcing the group to stop, turn, or back off. Moments later, on board the USS George Washington, a collision alarm sounded. The radar screens lit up, and the distance closed to under 12 nautical miles. A clear sign the interception was deliberate, not accidental. Venezuela was effectively declaring a stretch of international waters as its own security zone, daring the U.S. Navy to react. Yet instead of veering away, the American carrier group held course. The message was unmistakable. Navigation freedoms would not be compromised. What unfolded over the next few minutes would test tactics, resolve, and maritime signal sending at the highest level. But by choosing to confront the U.S. Navy, Venezuela had made a critical miscalculation, and they discovered far too quickly that they were challenging the wrong opponent. If you're ready to follow this high-stakes naval face-off step by step, hit subscribe to our channel, Military Power, because what happens next could change everything in the world of maritime power projection. At 4:19, the 3 Venezuelan patrol vessels advanced in a tight V-shaped formation, their wakes slicing clean lines across the Caribbean surface as they pushed past 28 knots. Instead of shadowing from a distance, they angled themselves directly into the projected route of the U.S. carrier strike group, moving with the precision of a unit that had rehearsed the maneuver more than once. Each shift of their bow inched them closer to the corridor the USS George Washington would naturally pass through, weaving into the American path in a way that looked like a test, a signal, and a trap all at once. As the distance shrank, the U.S. carrier's bridge detected the abnormal approach. Radar operators called out the tightening triangle on their screens, and within seconds, the collision alarm echoed through the steel halls. Sailors hurried to their stations, fastening gear, checking communications, and preparing for whatever the next minutes might bring. Although carrier groups are designed to handle pressure, an interception inside 12 nautical miles is never dismissed as routine. For large vessels, this range is the psychological and tactical threshold where reaction time drops dramatically. A ship the size of a carrier cannot turn sharply or accelerate away. Any hostile vessel breaching this distance can force a confrontation simply through positioning, and that is why the bridge treated the fast closing formation with such gravity. Despite the early hour, tension built quickly. The Venezuelan vessels maintained perfect alignment. Their bows pointed not toward open water, but toward the predicted movement of the carrier itself. It became clear they were not drifting, observing, or patrolling. They were locking into what naval analysts often describe as an attack geometry, a calculated angle where one turn or acceleration could cut across another ship's bow. What made the moment even more striking was the lack of any slowdown from the intercepting formation. Their momentum held steady, and their navigation lights remained bright and assertive. They were not hiding their presence, they were amplifying it. On the American bridge, the watch officer monitored every bearing change. The carrier's escorts tightened their own formation, and although no weapons were armed, the readiness posture shifted silently and unmistakably. Movements around the deck grew sharper. Orders traveled faster. Everyone understood that whatever Venezuela intended, it was unfolding now. As the gap narrowed further, a realization spread through the carrier's command deck. This was not surveillance. This was not a miscalculated patrol route. The Venezuelan vessels were placing themselves in a direct intercept position, creating a line they clearly did not expect the United States to cross. They were not testing equipment, they were testing resolve. And in those final seconds of the approach, the push toward direct confrontation became undeniable. The pattern was too exact, the angle too committed, and the timing too deliberate for chance. It was a maneuver designed to provoke a decision at the highest stakes. Now imagine you were the American officer standing on that bridge in the dim pre-dawn light, watching 3 fast patrol ships lock into formation and close the distance without hesitation, with alarms sounding, radar screens tight, and every eye on you. Would you hold the course, or would you turn? At the moment the Venezuelan formation locked into its forward angle, the U.S. Navy answered with a move that was as calm as it was calculated. The USS Gravely, positioned on the carrier's starboard side, pushed its turbines harder and began sliding into a new trajectory. The destroyer tilted its bow toward the intercept line, drifting starboard in a deliberate arc that placed it directly between the fast-moving patrol craft and the USS George Washington. Out on open water, speed is only part of the contest. What truly matters is positioning, because the ship that claims the decisive angle first controls how the entire confrontation unfolds. That is why the Gravely's maneuver felt cold, sharp, and unnervingly precise. It did not swerve or lurch. Instead, it cut across the sea, with the confidence of a vessel that understood every meter of the battle space. Up on deck, the next signal rose into the wind as an MH-60R Seahawk spun its rotors to life. The piercing whir grew louder, echoing across the carrier group as the helicopter lifted from its pad and swung into orbit above the destroyer. Its flight path formed a protective ring that could be seen from miles away, demonstrating a common U.S. Navy tactic used in tense encounters. Naval Air Systems Command has frequently noted in its public releases that Seahawk units provide early visual deterrence during close approaches, offering both surveillance and overwatch without escalating to force. This is why the aircraft hovered at a controlled distance, creating a visible reminder that the strike group was fully aware of every angle the Venezuelan ships were attempting to exploit. Below, the Gravely's bridge team monitored the intercept line with steadiness. The destroyer was now acting as a soft barrier, a tool the Navy often uses to expose an approaching vessel's true intention. By occupying the contested path at a sharper angle, the Gravely forced the Venezuelan ships to choose: either adjust their heading, reveal an escalation, or risk a dangerous crossing situation. Analysts describing similar episodes, such as those documented by the U.S. Naval Institute in 2022, have emphasized that these soft block maneuvers allow the Navy to increase tactical clarity without initiating confrontation. The idea is simple. When the United States places a destroyer in your direct line of travel, your next move says everything. For a brief moment, observers could have expected the Venezuelan formation to slow down, widen its spacing, or alter course. Yet none of that happened. Instead, the 3 patrol ships held their speed, maintaining a stubborn, almost defiant momentum as they closed the distance. Their wakes stretched in long streaks behind them, showing no hesitation and no sign of retreat. This refusal to yield added a new layer of tension to the scene, because it meant the Gravely's presence was not enough to change their plan. From the air, the Seahawk circled and captured each shift in angle, transmitting clear footage back to the destroyer. From the sea, the Gravely kept advancing, steady as a blade. As the formation tightened, one truth became impossible to ignore. Venezuela was not simply testing the carrier group's radar or discipline. The refusal to drop below high-speed approach suggested a deeper play, a bid to pressure the U.S. Navy into diverting its course. Yet the American response remained unwavering. By holding its position and controlling the intercept line, the Gravely was quietly making a statement that required no broadcast, no warning, and no raised weapon. The sea may be wide, but the first ship to secure the critical angle dictates who bends and who holds firm. And in this confrontation, Venezuela had pushed forward with confidence, but the U.S. Navy had already begun shaping the outcome without firing a single shot. The next phase of the confrontation unfolded slowly at first, almost quietly, yet every movement carried weight. As the Venezuelan patrol vessels continued closing the gap, The USS gravely shifted its posture in a way every sailor on deck understood immediately. The destroyer's 5-inch Mark 45 gun, normally kept pointed forward in a neutral position, began to rotate. It did not swing fast, nor did it lock onto any target. Instead, it eased toward the direction of the 3 approaching ships, stopping at an angle that made one thing unmistakable. The United States had entered a state of readiness. Naval photographers have documented similar moments in past close encounters, such as those reported by Naval News in 2023, where a destroyer adjusted its main gun angle during a tense standoff in the South China Sea to signal preparedness without escalating to a firing posture. The gesture is subtle, but every nation with a navy recognizes it instantly. Around the Gravely, other weapon systems shifted in their own quiet ways. The close-in weapon system, dormant a few minutes earlier, began tracking in passive mode. Its sensors hummed only internally, and the radars embedded within its white dome scanned the horizon without emitting the aggressive signatures associated with a full targeting cycle. Simultaneously, the ship's SPY-1 radar, the heart of the Aegis combat system, maintained its wide-area picture in a listening stance. Although SPY-1 is capable of illuminating targets with extraordinary strength, the crew kept it in a non-threatening configuration, collecting raw data while avoiding any move that Venezuela could misinterpret as an intent to fire. Above the destroyer, the MH-60R Seahawk drew a wide orbit, carving long arcs in the morning sky. Against the blue backdrop, its silhouette resembled a floating sentry, the kind of airborne guardian that keeps watch long before conflict breaks out. The U.S. Navy has highlighted the role of Seahawk patrols in several public briefings, including one released by the Naval Air Systems Command in 2022, describing how helicopters provide early detection and de-escalation by simply being visible overhead. From its vantage point, the helicopter observed the Venezuelan formation tightening again, sending continuous imagery back to the ship below. Out on the open sea, visibility can be as powerful as firepower. The United States has relied on what analysts often call deterrence by visibility, a strategy where showing readiness is more effective than actually using force. History supports this approach. The Congressional Research Service noted in a 2021 report on maritime security that demonstrating posture during high-tension encounters often prevents escalation by forcing the opposing side to reconsider the consequences of pushing forward. This strategy works because every nation understands the rules of the sea, and every navy knows that when a destroyer displays its weapons, even lightly, the next steps must be chosen with caution. For the Gravely, this display was deliberate. The destroyer revealed its capabilities but held back its aggression. It showed that the United States was fully prepared while still giving Venezuela every opportunity to disengage. From the carrier's bridge, sailors watched the unfolding choreography. The circling helicopter, the angled main gun, the hum of passive sensors. None of it was reckless. All of it was controlled, professional, and unmistakably firm. Yet despite the warnings written across every movement of the American formation, the Venezuelan ships continued forward. Their bows cut deeper into the sea, and the range closed to 4 nautical miles, a distance that, for military vessels, is uncomfortably tight. At that point, every shift of water, every change of speed, and every turn of a propeller matters. Instead of slowing down or widening their spacing, the Venezuelan formation pressed on. The tension rose again. The Gravely had shown readiness. The Seahawk had broadcast awareness from above. The radar systems had painted a clear picture of the incoming threat. Nevertheless, Venezuela ignored all of it, driving the confrontation into a zone where decisions must be made quickly. The first words sent across the open frequency came from the USS Gravely, carried through the early morning static like a line drawn in salt water. The destroyer broadcast a calm but unmistakable message, the same standardized language the U.S. Navy has used for decades during freedom of navigation transits in international waters. It reminded every ship listening that the carrier strike group was following a lawful maritime corridor recognized on global nautical charts and that all vessels nearby were expected to operate safely. Because the transmission went out on an open frequency, not a private military channel, it became instantly public. Any merchant captain, fishing boat, or coastal station tuned in could hear the United States state its position with clarity and confidence. Yet Venezuela chose not to answer with words. Instead, the lead patrol ship hoisted a sequence of maritime flags, their colors snapping sharply in the wind. The coded signals implied territorial enforcement, echoing the same political rhetoric Caracas has used in past maritime disputes when it claimed expanded security zones. By raising signals rather than speaking on the radio, Venezuela made its point in a way that avoided direct confrontation, but amplified symbolic defiance. From the bridge of the USS George Washington, sailors watched those flags rise through binoculars, understanding immediately what they meant. Venezuela wanted to redefine a space the rest of the world considers open ocean. As both sides broadcast their intentions, one verbally, one visually, neither shifted course. The Americans held their 20-knot transit as steady as a metronome, and the Venezuelan formation continued pushing forward. The result was an eerie, brittle silence. No follow-up messages, no demands, no negotiations. Just two lines of steel separated by narrowing water and growing tension. For viewers trying to imagine that moment, it is important to understand why even a single degree of course change matters. When a major navy alters direction in international waters because another nation wants it to, that movement can be treated as an acknowledgement of someone else's authority. Maritime analysts have long warned that such concessions, even subtle ones, create precedents that return later as political leverage. This is why the United States remained unyielding. Its consistency is not stubbornness, it is strategic necessity. Meanwhile, deep inside the Gravely, technicians monitored engine signatures from the Venezuelan patrol vessels. Tracking software mapped every fluctuation, and a clear pattern emerged. The three ships were still running hard. Their engines stayed above 20 knots, well beyond the speed used for observation or shadowing. Instead of slowing down to signal caution or de-escalation, the Venezuelan vessels maintained thrust, producing long, white wakes that cut aggressively across the sea. The Seahawk circling above transmitted real-time footage, confirming what the onboard sensors already indicated. The patrol craft were not backing down. If anything, they were preparing to close even further. This created a psychological duel, unlike anything exchanged by weapons or radar locks. On one side, the U.S. strike group projected stability. Steady bearing, steady tone, steady discipline. On the other, Venezuela projected momentum, movement without hesitation, speed without pause. The clash played out in silence and symbols rather than fire and noise, but it carried the same weight as any kinetic confrontation. For nearly a minute, the two formations existed inside a fragile equilibrium. The airwaves remained empty. The engines roared beneath the hulls, and every sailor on deck understood how easily the next moment could tip toward crisis. Then, as new readings scrolled across the Gravely screens, the twist emerged. The Venezuelan ships were still holding speed above the 20-knot threshold. They were not drifting. They were not withdrawing. They were maintaining the power needed to escalate quickly if the situation turned. That single detail was enough to thicken the tension already hanging over the sea, proving that the radio war was not just a contest of words. It was a contest of will. The final approach toward the 4 nautical mile mark felt like watching two walls closing in on each other with no intention of slowing. The U.S. carrier strike group held its line with the confidence of a formation that had crossed these waters thousands of times, while the Venezuelan patrol vessels continued advancing as if trying to force a moment that could not be undone. According to recorded behaviors in similar maritime encounters reported by outlets like USNI News, 4 nautical miles is where large naval ships enter what many sailors call the gray zone, a distance where reaction time becomes razor thin and a single incorrect turn can cause an international incident. The Gravely clearly understood this, yet its posture never shifted. The American destroyer maintained its pace without hesitation. Engines hummed at a steady rhythm, and the ship sliced through the water at a speed designed to guarantee positional dominance without looking provocative. Behind it, the USS George Washington continued cruising at roughly 20 knots, as confirmed by carrier group behavior in previous transits documented by the Maritime Executive. No deviation, no course corrections, no outward hint of uncertainty. It was an unwavering demonstration of discipline, carried out not with aggression, but with precision. Across the bridge, the air was tense, but controlled. Every console glowed with tracking data. The Venezuelan patrol ships appeared as sharp icons on radar, and officers watched their trajectory with a mix of focus and calm anticipation. Although none of the American weapons fired, sensors across the strike group shifted into a firm, deliberate tracking pattern. The main battery on the Gravely remained angled toward the incoming formation. Passive radar systems measured each motion. Heat signatures from the Venezuelan engines were logged in real time. None of these actions were escalatory, yet together, they signaled that the United States was fully prepared for any turn the next few minutes might take. What made the situation even more intense was the silence. For nearly 3 minutes, neither side issued another radio call. The absence of communication transformed the sea into a psychological arena. Journalists who covered the 2020 Persian Gulf standoff have noted that long stretches of silence between competing vessels can be more intimidating than shouted warnings, because it forces each side to act based solely on intent, not negotiation. That tension pulsed through the Gravely's decks. Every sailor knew they were navigating the thin line between deterrence and confrontation. As the two formations crept closer to the 4 nautical mile threshold, the stakes sharpened. Tiny changes in wake patterns, shifts in engine wash, and micro adjustments on radar screens were monitored with near surgical attention. The Venezuelan vessels still carried significant speed, pushing white bursts of water along their bows. Their formation remained tight. Their intentions remained unreadable. Then, almost without warning, the twist arrived. Sensors aboard the Gravely captured a subtle but unmistakable change. The lead Venezuelan patrol ship began easing off its throttle, dropping its speed from the high 20s down to around 18 knots. The other two vessels mirrored the move. The sudden reduction was slight but meaningful, because maritime analysts often describe speed changes as the first physical sign of de-escalation. It was not a retreat. Not yet. But it was the first step away from the brink. From the American bridge, the shift registered instantly. The Venezuelan wakes softened. The tight attack geometry loosened. The deadly pressure of the moment began to lift like steam rising from the sea. For 3 long minutes, the two sides had approached the edge of action, and in the end, it was Caracas, not Washington, that blinked. Even in silence, the message was unmistakable. The United States had held the line without firing a shot, and Venezuela had been the first to yield. When the Venezuelan patrol vessels finally reduced speed, the first real shift in the standoff became visible across the water. Their tight, V-shaped formation, which had been pushing aggressively toward the U.S. carrier strike group, began to loosen. The lead ship angled slightly off its previous intercept line, and within moments the entire trio started sliding toward the east-southeast, drifting away from the path of the USS George Washington. It was not a sharp turn or a dramatic retreat. Instead, it looked like a quiet, reluctant slide, the kind of maneuver a commander makes when he realizes the confrontation has reached its limit. Observers familiar with similar maritime incidents, such as those reported by Reuters in 2021 involving Venezuelan patrol boats challenging foreign vessels near disputed waters, would recognize this pattern instantly: a controlled withdrawal disguised as a change of course. On the American side, nothing changed. The USS George Washington continued cutting through the Caribbean at roughly 20 knots. It's heading straight and unmoved, as though the entire encounter were a minor inconvenience. The massive carrier did not adjust its rudder, did not shift its engines, and did not signal any acknowledgement of the Venezuelan pullback. It simply stayed the course. Analysts from the U.S. Naval Institute have repeatedly pointed out in their public briefings that this is the most powerful message a carrier strike group can send. The ship that moves first concedes psychological ground, and here, the United States did not move at all. The destroyer USS gravely mirrored that same controlled discipline. Its formation held steady. Weapons stayed angled but inactive, and the MH-60R Seahawk continued its patrol overhead, recording the subtle retreat as the Venezuelan ships edged farther from the carrier's bow. Even from altitude, the change was easy to see. The aggressive wakes that once cut fiercely toward the American line now curved outward, softening into long trails that stretched behind the Venezuelan hulls as they broke off from their intercept posture. So as the Venezuelan vessels faded toward the eastern horizon and the U.S. formation continued untouched, one lingering question followed them across the waves. If Venezuela was willing to push this far today, how far will they go next time? As the last traces of wake settled across the Caribbean, the shape of the morning became unmistakably clear. Venezuela had attempted to block the path of a U.S. carrier strike group, pushing fast and hard into a corridor that belongs to no single nation. Yet through every minute of that standoff, the United States refused to shift even a single degree. The USS George Washington held its course with the same steady confidence seen in past freedom of navigation missions publicly reported by the U.S. Navy, and the destroyer USS gravely supported that resolve with flawless discipline. No missiles armed, no shots fired, and no alarms beyond the ones already echoing inside the ships. Still, the message carried the weight of steel. In the end, it was Venezuela that turned away. Their formation slid east-southeast, speed dropped, and the dangerous geometry dissolved. What forced the retreat was not firepower, but presence. The very principle analysts often highlight when explaining why U.S. carrier groups remain unmatched. By staying calm, predictable, and unwavering, the U.S. Navy demonstrated once again why it is the standard by which maritime power is measured. For American crews, this was just another morning enforcing the freedoms that keep global sea lanes open. Yet for anyone watching closely, it was a reminder that brinkmanship at sea is never theoretical. So imagine yourself standing on that bridge at dawn, watching 3 fast patrol ships aim straight for your bow. Would you have held the line the way the US did? Let us know in the comment. And don't forget to subscribe to Military Power, because what happens next could change the future of every standoff on the world's oceans.